look like child's play. The precision involved and the scale of death involved is going to be absolutely mind-boggling. People cannot even imagine it. And once again, this is why I'm making the episode, is so that we can connect all the dots here, that the concept of having racist, supremacist people making these doctrines and in charge of these technologies is something we need to push back against. We should not have AI bombs loitering in the area for endless amounts of time. I mean, we need to be smarter with our use of technology here. And as civilians who are paying for this stuff, this is our tax dollars, we need to be the one that says, no, we need health care. We need our roads to be done. We need medicine and education and safety, not more robot bombs to go to the other side of the planet. This is absolutely ridiculous. And it really brings like a moral problem to the surface on so many different levels. We see you very soon. This what I'm here to do. Here to inspire you. We headed to the moon. Look, yeah, I'm living proof. About to bless off like zoo. We about to take the roof. We have a lift. We headed to the moon. Just for the culture, stacking our beats like it's Folgers. We on the move, we in motion. I believe I got a notion. Nothing but love, that's devotion. Budgets don't cost me, I'm with the commotion. I can be Batman, then turn to the Joker. Debo with the loafers. I'm trying to stay focused. I see it, I want it. That's hocus and pocus. And while it's all in my hands, but I give it to Allah. He blessed me with more and more overflow. I know I'm the best. Hello, welcome to Inspired Earth. It has been way too long since I've made an episode, and welcome back, everybody. I'm happy to be here making another one. I've been thinking of you guys basically like every day. I'm not even joking. Like sometimes multiple times a day, I'll be sitting there thinking, man, I need to make a podcast episode. I'm sure there's tons of people all waiting, especially because of how bizarre everything has been lately. But what I'm going to be talking about today is Operation Southern Spear specifically. I just have some thoughts that I got to put out there about it, and then I'm going to be making a more bizarre episode on it that I think you guys will like. I'm not going to say anything more than that. So, without much ado, I just wanted to say hello, and that I was thinking of you guys, and thank you to all the new people that have joined the podcast. And we're going to talk about Operation Southern Spear, which Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, or aka Secretary of Defense, has announced that we're sending a robotic fleet to Venezuela. And it's very interesting that we have this robotic fleet going to Venezuela because they're justifying it with 1800s era laws and ideology, and it's just blatant racism and colonialism. And to be using robots for colonialism in 2025 is very striking. So we're going to be delving into this connection between the old thought and the new thought. And it's almost like the two different worlds of Earth, of the past and the future, are coming together in the present right now. And I'm going to be elaborating on that on a couple episodes as well, of how it just seems like we have like different worldviews or even Earths seemingly existing at the same time. So we're going to go into a Swedish publication, I believe this is Swedish, The Fear for Another Revolution / Colonialism, the Evolution of the Monroe Doctrine as an Instrument of Racist Domination and Hegemony in the Caribbean, by Juan Velasquez in the Institution for Culture Wissenschaper. And this is 2021. Social Integration and Globalization, I think, is maybe the publication that was in. So, summary, I believe that's what that says. The COVID-19 pandemic outbreak seems to have changed the history of humanity in a before and after it. Upon its beginning, environmentalists were happy of the return of wild animals to urban centers and to halt the global emissions. But when the numbers of deaths and infected grew, this is badly translated. I can already tell. So if there's something not grammatically correct, let's just assume that it's the translator. It was evident that the black and colored populations in the North Atlantic powers were most affected. The situation framed a powerful return of anti-racist and anti-colonial mobilizations headed by the Black Lives Matter movement. At the same time, North Atlantic empires used their military power to repress their own populations and to capture medical devices on the seas. Moreover, they intensified it. Their economic sanctions with a naval blockade against the Caribbean nations had risen against their hegemonies. So, this little bit right here about capturing medical devices on the seas, I think is very telling and important because it talks about the weaponization and segregation of medical devices and healthcare, even back that long ago. So you would see that from all time since then. The book Tuberculosis, I can't remember the rest of the title, but you could probably just type in tuberculosis book and find it. It talks about how with AIDS and tuberculosis and all these different diseases that the healthcare and treatment to it are like sequestered away, and they try not to let poor people have medical care. And by they, I mean the rich and the people in control of all these systems and government. So we see from the past like 300 years the weaponization of healthcare, which is very interesting. I just felt like that needed to be noted. That's such a small sentence, but a big meaning to it. Moreover, they intensified their economic sanctions with a naval blockade against the Caribbean nations that had risen against their hegemonies. Sounds familiar. As during the colonial piracies of the 1700s, the North Atlantic powers coordinated how to confiscate gold reserves, bank accounts, and subsidiary companies with operations in the U.S. and Europe. In open violation of the Charter of the United Nations, its financial institutions followed the Monroe Doctrine, a consensus between the U.S. and its North Atlantic allies to intervene in the countries of the Americas. This time, the doctrine was used to cut off access to the credit to Venezuela and Cuba for the acquisition of medicines and hospital equipment. So again, we see this repeated pattern of the weaponization of healthcare and not allowing technologies and treatments to get to poor people or to targeted nations who dare to go against the empire, such as Europe or the United States, or the empire was traditionally white institutions. So this goes back to racist ideology, all of this healthcare stuff, which is pretty wild. Not a lot of people are connecting this, but just as the article begins with, people are now starting to connect this. For their part, these Caribbean nations controlled the pandemic, focusing on the Cuban health prevention model developed since the 1960s. Cuba went even further and lent its medical personnel to some 60 countries in the global south and in Europe. Fits 2020 is their citing. Turning medical care into an instrument of solidarity with whom Frantz Fanon calls the wretched of the earth. So they're making healthcare accessible to poor people. But as if very little had changed in 200 years of history, the response from the liberal regimes to Cuba and Venezuela in Europe and the Americas continued to be indifference, harassment, and racism. This chapter addresses the rise and fall of the Monroe Doctrine as an instrument of the North Atlantic colonial dominance, as will be exemplified below. Through the years of Monroe Doctrine has developed into an international consensus among North Atlantic white colonial elites to freeze black and brown populations in Caribbean and Latin American societies in a perpetual state of exploitation and submission to their interests. So this is a consensus among all North Atlantic white colonial elites. And we could see that being called the Five Eyes Alliance today, who some would put Israel pretty close to that alliance as well, like a Six Eye Alliance. And that's all white supremacist colonial civilizations that have this ideology. However, at the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, the already active support of Russia and China to Venezuela and to Cuba may have disrupted this hegemony to the grade of contesting the North Atlantic powers' military and economic dominance. So this is when the conflagration that's kind of happening right now, or leading up to it, started. Is this the end of North Atlantic dominance in the Caribbean, or is it the start of yet another era of much more enlarged bourgeois or liberal imperial dominance? To answer this question, the chapter recounts some historical events around 1803, 1903, and 2003 until today, which this is 2021. That's when this was written. To stress the domination of North Atlantic racism to ensure the hegemony of the Euro-American civilization project, in the next section, the text combines these temporalities around the relationship between the domination from Foucault and the hegemony from Gramsci to show how racism serves to perpetuate its coloniality around the fear of turning into another Haiti, Cuba, or Venezuela. So this shows how far back it goes and the beginnings of how this current standoff had arisen. With the COVID-19 pandemic, America losing its hegemonic power, Russia and China gaining strength, BRICS gaining strength. I'll just go ahead and say now that, like, I think a lot of Operation Southern Spear is going to be about limiting the causeways and waterways around these newly tempted BRICS nations, or some of the ones that are about to be BRICS or could be, versus the ones that already are. They're basically just trying to, like, isolate these nations economically using these robot speedboats. So this is from 2019. Monroeism is the other side of Jim Crow, the side of facing the South. So Jim Crow in the North, and this Monroeism is like the Jim Crow of the South. This forum of Sao Paulo of Washington, D.C. marks a significant step forward in building North-South solidarity on behalf of economic and social justice throughout the hemisphere and respect for the sovereign equality of nations. The forum comes on the heels of the defense of Venezuelan embassy by the Embassy Protection Collective. It takes place amid growing nationwide direct action by the Never Again Is Now movement and allies to shut down the concentration camps and restore dignified treatment of Central American refugees. And it is held during the days of the protest over the failure of the Department of Justice to prosecute NYPD police officers for the murder of Eric Garner, an officer who is still on the city payroll. These experiences highlight the white supremacist link between the institutional racism within U.S. borders and neoliberal offensive by Washington and its right-wing allies against the Bolivarian resistance and popular sectors in Latin America and the Caribbean. So Eric Garner, I think he got killed for breaking up a fight, and they tried to say he was selling cigarettes, but the video just showed him breaking up a fight, and, like, they shot him. So he tried to stop people from fighting and was killed. And the NYPD guy got away with it. But so some of this stuff is going to sound like it's happening now. But this was in 2019. So we have to remember that. And as far as the dignified treatment of Central American refugees and the ending of concentration camps, what they're talking about is that El Salvador prison that we all saw, where they had sent people. And Todd Miller had talked about it on the episode that we had that we talked about the Latin American stuff. All of his books highlight this very heavily, and you can see, like, an on-the-ground perspective on this. A lot of people are just now learning about this and learning that this has been going on for a long time, as all of this has been. That's kind of the point of this episode, is this is not new, but what's new is using this stuff to defend robots, or the use of, like, killbots, robot speedboat Killbots laden with explosives. The Trump administration has stepped up the necropolitics of white supremacy and white plutocracy, which now expresses itself in the police surveillance state at home and Monroeism abroad. And I had to look up what necropolitics is because I wanted to make sure I knew what they were saying here. It says necropolitics is a sociopolitical theory of the use of social and political power to dictate how some people may live and how some people may die. I guess you could call that eugenics or maybe even ethnic cleansing, and I would say that that's what the BBB was, the bigger bill, big beautiful bill, July 4th. I'll probably make an episode about that eventually. That's what the whole point of this is. That it's all necropolitics. They're choosing who is going to die, and even during COVID, the Texas Attorney General at that time said like, sacrifice your elders for the economy and go out and drink. And I'm not joking. That's not a drink, or that's not a joke. That's what he said. He literally told people to just like just give up on old people, and we legalize drinking and driving. You can go and get a drink and drive around now. So go do that. That's what they told everybody. And God knows how many alcoholics they created by telling people to go and drink. So police surveillance state at home and Monroeism abroad, white supremacy and plutocracy, both expressions have common historical ideological roots in Europe, in European supremacy of the 15th century and the invention of the Americas. Both expressions have common historical ideological roots in European supremacy of the 15th century and the invention of the Americas. Today, this ideology of conquest and subjugation continues to inflict colonial wounds on Afro-descendant and original peoples. These wounds are the result of multiple hierarchies of domination, including race, class, gender, identity, nationality, religion, and location. The idea of a colonial wound is not to suggest fatalism. History is not over, nor is it exclusively written from the viewpoint of the global north. 500 years of European aggression against India has been met by 500 years of resistance. But not only resistance, despite setbacks, the so-called pink tide represents a significant advancement of the decolonizing project that extends back to 1492. And will not cease until all of the peoples of India recover their sovereignty. Today we come together north and south to affirm our co-responsibility for building a new world, one in which many worlds can fit in, to use a Zapatista expression. Tonight I would like to examine 3 fronts in this project of transformation, of which the Embassy Protection Collective, the protests against the concentration camps, and the outrage over police terror are emblematic. I suspect something has changed in us in a very positive way as a result of 37 days of resistance by the Embassy Protection Collective and their supporters. The collective defended the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C. at the invitation of the constitutional government of President Nicolas Maduro. The collective inside the embassy and supporters outside had to confront the racist, misogynist, and homophobic attacks of those of the Guaidó supporters, who voiced support for the criminal U.S. economic sanctions and U.S. military intervention against their own people. This was written in 2019, even older than the last article. When it became clear that the collective would not be intimidated by either Guaidó supporters or the Secret Service, and the support for the collective in the streets was continuing to grow, the police seized the embassy grounds and arrested the members of the collective who were inside. Since this police action was a serious violation of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations of 1961, the department lost moral and legal ground, while the collective fortified North-South solidarity and exposed the farcical nature of the shadow government of interim President Juan Guaidó, who there was no election, and the State Department, the U.S. government, just came out and said, this guy's the president now. So they said that the election was fake, and then there was other times that there wasn't even an election, and they would try to put people in charge. The fight for fair immigration policies. Here at home, we are also mindful of the struggle on the immigration front, and in particular, the broad-based protests against concentration camps and ICE raids. We see U.S. citizens and immigrants marching together to defend the dignity of Central American refugees. Not only have thousands of activists across the U.S. blocked entrance to the camps, in some towns, neighborhoods are coming out to stop ICE agents from seizing members of their community. This is often spontaneous resistance extends the concept of sanctuary, which is institutional, to the practice of collective responsibility. So it's not just a legislative concept of providing sanctuary, they're actually making it a collective responsibility to make sure that these people are safe. Racism at home and neo-Monroeism abroad. With regard to police terror inflicted on people of color, there's widespread protests aimed at ending the impunity of police who commit murder, as well as the systematic practice of racial profiling. Wasn't this before Black Lives Matter? This is kind of crazy. I mean, it was right before it, so. These protests are part of a larger nationwide movement aimed at reforming a racist justice system and dismantling the increasingly repressive and militarized police/surveillance state. In response to all three of these assaults on human and civil rights, the Monroeist offensive in Latin America, the persecution of refugees, and the police state, there's a convergence of progressive forces which share certain core values in opposing what Martin Luther King Jr. called the three evils of militarism, poverty, and racism. The alternative to necropolitics, as Argentine-Mexican philosopher Enrique Dussel points out, is to defend the growth of human life and community and in harmony with the biosphere. That's excellent. I love that. The Zapatista National Liberation Army expressed well the spirit of today's North-South solidarity in their June 2005 Sixth Declaration from the forest of La Condona. The EZLN at the time was reflecting on more than a decade of struggle and international solidarity since the indigenous uprisings of 1994 in Chiapas. The first thing we see is that our hearts are not the same as before. When we began our struggle, it is bigger now, because we have touched the hearts of many good people, and we also see our heart has been hurt, or we can say, more wounded. And it is not that it is wounded on account of trickery perpetrated on us by bad governments, but that when we touch the hearts of others, then we are also touching their pains. It is as though we see ourselves in a mirror. Today, our hearts, too, are not the same. In this moment of danger, we too can see ourselves as if in a mirror. And in this mirror, we can identify a colonial wound caused by the same historic maladies. I see this so clearly. That's such a good line right there. From the time of the conquest of the Amerindia and the transatlantic slave trade up to contemporary Monroeism and the new Jim Crow, some currents in European and U.S. political philosophy have justified the subjugation of non-European peoples. As early as 1550, a debate took place before the Royal Council of Valladolid over the humanity of the Indians, and whether Spain was justified in waging war against them. For modern European political philosophy, the rights of man were generally not intended for Africans, indigenous people, women, or those without property. A lot of people forget you could be white back then, but you also had to own property, which is interesting. And we're starting to get through this article here, so hang on with me before we get to the robots. We've got to get the old before we can get to the new. Monroeism and the new Jim Crow, two sides of the same coin. We can still perceive the legacy of European supremacy in case anyone has forgotten. In U.S. exceptionalism, this exceptionalism claims noble ends, but it is a real face manifested in a racist criminal justice system, and Washington's drive to recolonize Latin America in the ongoing atrocity of concentration camps on U.S. soil. Again, this was not written in 2025, this was 6 years ago. Let's be clear, Monroeism is the other side of Jim Crow, the side facing south. The year 1989 revealed deep cracks in the historic claims of European and later U.S. world supremacy. Political theorist Francis Fukuyama suggested that with the fall of the Soviet Union, 1989 to 1991, the end of history was upon us. He did not mean the world was literally about to end, but that politics and economics had arrived at a definite triumph of capitalism over socialism. But his pronouncement was premature. During that same year, there was an uprising by the Bravo Pueblo of Venezuela, the Caracazo, in response to neoliberal reform measures imposed by the President Carlos Andreas Perez. The same champions of the idea that markets ought to be free from government interference had no qualms making use of the state's monopoly on violence to impose the adjustment imperatives of finance capital on a nation which the majority of citizens lived in abject poverty. Perez authorized the military use of lethal force, and hundreds, if not thousands, of mostly poor, Afro-descendant, and working-class Venezuelans were gunned down in the streets of Caracas. So, he says that he's going to bring in neoliberal reforms to put free market capitalism in charge, and then use the state's monopoly on violence, so because only the state can commit violence legally, to kill off all of these people, all of the poor people who are disagreeing with him. 1 year, or the Monroe Doctrine versus the Bolivarian alternative. The Monroe Doctrine versus the Bolivarian alternative. 1 year after the Caracazo, the first meeting of the Forum of Sao Paulo in 1990 was held in Brazil to discuss ways to reverse the neoliberal tide that had exacerbated economic inequality, privatized public services, eroded labor rights, compromised national sovereignty, and imposed austerity in the name of the ever-elusive future prosperity. Sounds like what's going on now as well. 10 years later, in December of 1998, Hugo Chavez would be elected president of Venezuela on a popular platform which offered an alternative to the neoliberal model, the Bolivarian alternative. Over the past 2 decades, one of the principal targets of Monroeism has been Venezuela, not only on account of its oil reserves and other natural resources, but also because since the election of Chavez in December 1998, this Bolivarian republic has defied Washington agenda. This defiance involved forging a path forward towards regional independence and integration, a path that ushered in the pink tide of progressive governments and social movements which lifted millions out of poverty, reclaimed national sovereignty over natural resources, and revalorized the cultures of original and Afro-descendant peoples. In the face of a U.S.-NATO alliance bent on world domination, the Bolivarian alternative has welcomed the emergence of a multipolar world. As a result, in direct collision with Monroeism, the Bolivarian Revolution has led to an expansion of commerce between Latin America and China, Russia, and other trading partners. So this is going back to the BRICS thing that I was talking about. All of these different quote-unquote South nations, or we used to call them third world nations, all the global South, that's what we're calling it now, are all uniting, and they, for the first time in history, BRICS and the global South and the third world countries have more people and more money and more infrastructure, more trade than America or the West or Europe. And we're far behind at this point. And that's what the tariffs are supposed to be. They're punishing the whole world and stomping them down, and it's extracting wealth from the whole world to give it to America to keep us on top. This is the supremacist, hegemonic, imperialist ideology that we're talking about that keeps on being a pattern throughout all of these socio-economic and geopolitical historical relationships that have developed for the past 300 years. It all has to do with like keeping the right people at the top, and the right people are rich white landowning people. They're the ones that maintain all the secrets. They're the ones with the monopoly of power on the violence. So that's what this is talking about, and why we're going to be using robots to try to stomp out all of these nations trying to be independent, trying to assert their independence right here. So, where was I? In the eyes of the U.S. policymakers from both major political parties, keyword both major political parties, the unpardonable offense of Cuba, Nicaragua, Bolivia, and Venezuela has been to assert their independence, diversify their trading partnerships, and chart post-neoliberal and post-colonial alternatives to the Washington Consensus. How dare they be independent and sovereign and want the money from their gold mines to go to their people? That money for the oil and gold should come to Washington, D.C., and the rich bureaucrats and aristocrats. That's how it should be. That's the natural order of things, of course. Anything else is like a zebra eating a lion. Brown people can't get rich. That's just crazy. Like, that's what they actually believe. That's what this is going to. So that's very enlightening and gives a lot of perspective and context for the current events. So we're almost done here. Let's finish up. But this at the end it starts to get really important. So Monroeism inflicts a colonial wound in the South, and the new Jim Crow keeps open analogous wounds in the North. But the two faces of the coloniality of power, to use Annabelle Quijano's term, are manifest in Trump's zero-tolerance immigration policy, a policy for which Obama's mass deportation machine paved the way. The Central American refugee is a victim of both Monroeism and white nationalism. Context is critical here. The Obama administration created the conditions driving refugee flows out of Honduras by backing the coup against democratically elected President Manuel Zelaya in June 2009, which led to a repressive regime, the imposition of neoliberal experiments, and a rapid deterioration in public security. But that's not all. The Trump administration and the Organization of American States, OAS, dealt a fresh blow to pro-democracy forces in Honduras by backing a stolen election in 2017. It is these historic blows to democracy that have led to the current Honduran migration north. This is when the migrant caravans were coming up. Remember, we had like a 10,000 person caravan coming up, and nobody asked, where does a group of 10,000 people all get together from? How do we have like a mass that big all coming at once? It's because Obama and Trump destroying Central American governments. And here we are doing it again. Or trying to. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we fail. Even when we succeed in toppling the government, we fail in our long-term objectives of, well, I guess depends on what objective you want to believe. If you want to believe that we're helping them, then we fail. But if you believe what this is saying, and that our true goal, despite all the propaganda, is to destabilize these nations so that they can't compete and can't integrate. And that's the main purpose. So in that sense, we do succeed when we topple things. Even if we fail and make things unstable, that's still a success for us. So what is success and what is failure it gets really blurry with this sort of stuff. And you have to have the context, otherwise it gets really confusing. It is these historic blows to democracy have led to the current Honduran migration north. Those Honduran and Central American migrants who survived the trek through North Mexico to seek asylum in the U.S. now face the dehumanizing ordeal of concentration camps, family separation, or deportation. Some have already died as a result of their internment. Which, it's crazy. Again, this is 6 years old. U.S. necropolitics at home and abroad. Grassroots resistance to the necropolitics that has come characterized U.S. domestic and foreign policy is growing. The unavoidable faces of the victims of the prevailing system, both at home and abroad, are increasingly becoming the bad conscience of an exhausted liberalism. What centrist Democrats cannot fathom is that there is no way out of this wasteland created by neoliberal capitalism. Short of transforming the prevailing economic system, and this means pushing back against the increasingly coercive mechanisms of social control. The rehabilitation of Monroeism and the new Jim Crow have been the result of a deliberate U.S. bipartisan projects. For example, thanks to bipartisan consensus, the war on drugs has led to massive incarceration. The endless war on terror continues to provide political cover for the militarization of policing and universal domestic surveillance. Yet the FBI acknowledges that the main source of domestic terrorism comes from the ranks of white supremacists, which this was written before we scrubbed all of that data. The DHS and DOJ and all of them under the current administration of the Cheeto man has completely deleted all of these statistics to try to hide them. So we also recall that it is President Barack Obama's rehabilitation of Monroeism that began the U.S. offensive against progressive governments, political parties, and social movements in Latin America. Trump is merely taking off the mask of bedrock U.S. institutional racism and militarism that has been festering long before he was elected. Trump is no lone villain. He reflects the entrenched interests of the corporate state, which with all of the Epstein files and emails coming out right now, Trump is no lone villain is like very important to realize. He's just a spokesperson for a whole web of villains that are behind the scenes of all of our major institutions and have been for a long time. Even before the Nazis came around, this sort of stuff was going on. But since 1945 and the 50s and integrating all of the Nazis with Operation Paperclip, this stuff is on hyperdrive and trying to defeat the Soviets. That anything that's considered the socialist boogeyman or whatever, even if it's just people trying to be independent, they will use all of these atrocities and heinous tactics to destroy them, including withholding their health care and medicine, which we're watching that with Israel and Gaza as well. That Israel says they have to hold back medicine from starving people to protect themselves, allegedly, and it's the same thing here. That I would like to say as well, before we finish talking about the Monroe Doctrine, because we're on the last paragraph, that still to this day, people will come out in defense of the Monroe Doctrine saying, that is America trying to defend themselves. By trying to draw a line in the sand on all of these nations around us so that Europe can't come in and try to steal our land and resources again, or that's what it was in the past, was Europe, and now they're saying China or Russia, and it's such garbage. This is not protective, this is not defensive, this is aggressive, it's imperialism. It's blatant. Venezuela's not sending robot fleets to us, we're sending them to them. So, I mean, it's very obvious. Let's read this last paragraph here. What the corporate parties generally omit from their analysis of domestic and foreign policy is the common historical ideological roots of neo-Monroeism and the new Jim Crow, both of which are, in some sense, two sides of the same coin. While no doubt the impact of these twin maladies on their victims is conditioned by local factors, both inflict colonial wounds. By decolonizing our way of comprehending history, we are more likely to overcome the present dangers and in North-South solidarity advance towards building a world in which many worlds fit. And I think that's a excellent ending and something that we should be emphasizing. That's kind of the point of this episode as well. And that the North and South need to form solidarity and work together towards a world in which many worlds can fit. And what does that mean? That means all of these different cultures and nations can all exist on Earth together. But we're going to have to work together to deal with our environmental situation. I'm sure that you guys had seen a little bit about the AMOC or like the environment, yada yada. I know in America right now, some people have more pressing matters, or it feels like you have more pressing matters. You know, like if you have SNAP benefits that are not coming in, and you can't feed your family, it's hard to think about the ocean, right? But it's still really important, and the ocean still ultimately affects your family, even if it's hard to think about it. And Iceland had just said that the North Atlantic Current collapsing is a national security threat, and their government is actually looking at that. I'll probably make an episode about that sometime, but we can't deal with the ocean. Iceland, a tiny little nation, is one of the only nations on Earth that's talking about the AMOC collapse. They can't deal with it themselves. And they're on the north, so we're gonna need people on north and south all working together to try to fix our air, atmosphere, and land, our water cycle, our carbon cycle, our nitrogen cycle, biodiversity collapse. All of these sorts of things need to be dealt with as a global um, community rather than just one nation. And I think ultimately that's like a lesson that we can take from what I'm talking about here and this mixture of the 1800s racist ideology and current AI robot fleets, of why it's important to pay attention to this and how to steer our organizational attempts at making a better world. So, with the past in the past, let's move forward. And I, with the U.S. robot fleet, I want you to keep in mind this that had come from September 5th, 2025. Pentagon signs AI deal to aid military decision making. So, before we would have the military send out human beings to do these missions, right? We're the bombings that we're doing in the oceans, in the Atlantic and Pacific, those are with human beings. And I've got military family, and a lot of them are saying, this is illegal. We're not supposed to be doing these sorts of operations. The United Nations has said that our operations in Venezuela and the Pacific and Caribbean are illegal. So that says a lot. And by having AI start to go out there and do these bombings, I think it's a moral, like almost like moral escapism, or trying to think of the term for it. It's casting the moral duties onto a robot rather than a human, outsourcing morality. Let's say that, rather than like putting it on a human and having the human break the law, it's a robot now. So it's not as big of a deal, We're sending robots to do this. So I feel like that's important as well, that they're trying to skirt the law as well as the morality of it by using robots rather than humans. And that will continue to increase in the future, I believe. Let's go into the specifics of U.S. launches Operation Southern Spear, unveiling new robotic fleet to target cartels. One last thing before I start reading. I kind of think that this is maybe like a psyop, like a psychological operation. What do I mean by that, and why? I mean in that if I'm a Venezuelan farmer or somebody who, has lived relatively separately from technology, like some of the people in Venezuela do, if you get told that they're sending the United States, the biggest, most baddest country in the world, is sending a robot fleet to try to kill you and kill your country members and like have change things politically, which I'm sure if you were to go and read the definition of terrorism and then compare what we're doing right now to the definition of terrorism, you would get a very interesting response maybe of what you think we're actually doing there. But so we're I think that would be terrifying as a farmer to get told that they're sending robot fleets to come and try to kill people. However, with that being said, Venezuela is a massive, massive country. It has jungles and mountains. And I can tell you that robot speedboats are not going to help with the mountains. So, kind of like a psyop type of thing. But if you think of it in the terms of, like I was saying, that it was going to be used to try to contain them economically and not let them use their water ports, that would explain things more than trying to like necessarily cause like a regime change with the robot speedboats, because that's not going to work, obviously. So United States is launching a major new military and surveillance campaign in the Western Hemisphere, deploying an unprecedented mix of robotic air and sea vessels to counter Latin American drug trafficking cartels, allegedly. Called Operation Southern Spear, the initiative was formally announced Thursday by Defense Secretary or War Secretary Pete Hegseth, who said through his X account, a classic, that the mission follows a direct order from President Donald Trump. President Trump ordered action, and Department of War is delivering, Hegseth said. Operation Southern Spear defends our homeland, removes narco-terrorists from our hemisphere, and secures our homeland from the drugs that are killing our people. The Western Hemisphere is America's neighborhood, and we will protect it. So that last sentence right there is like very Monroeist type of thing. Like, the Western Hemisphere is ours. There was even a secret society during the Civil War where a bunch of Masonic Confederate leaders all got together and were going to make South America be like another part of America because they're our backyard. So even goes back to the Civil War of people thinking like this, and the founding fathers even. The campaign will be led by Joint Task Force Southern Spear in coordination with U.S. Southern Command and U.S. Naval Forces Southern Command, U.S. 4th Fleet, headquartered at Naval Station Mayport in Florida. Operations are expected to begin later this month. In a statement, 4th Fleet officials described Southern Spear as a significant step in the Navy's evolving hybrid fleet campaign, which integrates robotic and autonomous systems with traditional naval forces. Southern Spear will operationalize a heterogeneous mix of robotic and autonomous systems to support the detection and monitoring of illicit trafficking while learning lessons for other theaters. See, this is very, very important. They're saying that this is just like a scientific playground. They're going to get to like have fun and try to integrate these killer robots into our systems, because I'm sure that our people are watching Russia and Ukraine and how fast drones have been integrated into both sides there, how fast things are moving. I think I had shown some video one time of like a drone getting taken down by electronic countermeasures, by like being jammed. The Russians are flying fiber optic drones now. So the ground is just covered in fiber optic cables everywhere. Like, the same cables that run your internet are what is running these drones now. So they went from wireless to wired, back to wired drones, because they're not jammable. Anyways, America is very, very far behind the drone game, so this is them trying to catch up while also trying to crush them economically. So it's like a two-part. They're getting to scientifically experiment with their killer drones and being able to like starve all these poor people and keep them sequestered, keep their technology away. So it's a win-win for them. And the learning lessons for other theaters, obviously that's talking about further conflict with China or Russia as well, because they're going to be heavily into drones, and we can't do it yet. So this is us trying to use some drones on some poor farmers so that we can figure out how to use them, because we don't have them integrated. This will help develop critical techniques and procedures for integrating RAS into the maritime environment. According to the Navy, they will deploy long-dwell robotic surface vessels designed for persistent ocean patrols, small robotic interceptor boats capable of high-speed maneuvering, vertical takeoff and landing robotic aircraft for surveillance. The systems will operate alongside U.S. Coast Guard cutters at sea and feed intelligence into operations centers at 4th Fleet and Joint Intra-Agency Task Force South, which coordinates regional counter-narcotics missions. Officials say the deployment will help determine the most effective combinations of unmanned vehicles and manned forces for coordinated operations. Data that will shape Navy doctrine under Project 33. So they're making a whole new doctrine. We talked about the Monroe Doctrine, and this is Navy Doctrine Project 33. And a doctrine is just a strategy of how to use your assets or technology and how, in what way. Just because you have some stuff, like, how are you going to use it? You have to figure out that. The service's initiative to accelerate robotic integration into fleet missions. Using robotic assets is expected to increase U.S. presence in maritime choke points, and high traffic zones used by drug smuggling networks. So they're saying that they're going to control choke points and high traffic zones for quote unquote drug smuggling. It has nothing to do with like regular trade, surely, right? Navy leaders say the systems will also strengthen regional security cooperation by giving partner nations access to shared intelligence and detection tools. Operation Southern Spear is the next step in our hybrid fleet campaign, said Rear Admiral Carlos Sardillo, commander of U.S. Naval Forces, Southern Command, and U.S. 4th Fleet. Hybrid fleet operations increase our collaboration with partners in the region while advancing the Navy's tactics, techniques, procedures, and process. The announcement comes amid a growing military buildup in the Southern Caribbean of a size not seen in the region for decades. And it says we've sent the world's largest and most technologically advanced aircraft carrier, USS Gerald Ford, which I'm pretty sure China just made their biggest aircraft carrier. Gotta double check that, but I don't think that's the biggest anymore. But so let's look at some pictures of these drone things so that we can get a better idea of what we're talking about. This is Ukrainian Navy maritime drones 2022 to 23. So on top left, you have the first generation. Then you see them getting sleeker until you have just like underwater torpedoes with propellers and stuff. And this is a Russian one. It's very small. I tried to get it bigger. I wasn't able to. So both sides have it. Here's like a bigger version of the Ukrainian one. Camera, detonator, explosive. So you got like speedboats laden with explosives being controlled by AI. What could go wrong, right? Let's put more robot killbot bombs in charge of AI out there, right? We need more of these. This definitely made me sarcastic, by the way. Let's not have robot bombs everywhere. Ukraine first generation subsurface naval drone, electric powered, medium endurance recon and strike platform. So this is another type of robot naval drone. It's like a AI torpedo, it looks like. So I just gotta say that like the future of warfare is starting to become looking pretty bad, and that our War Department, State Department, Department of Defense seem to be preparing for industrial scale casualties. They're looking to try to make like AI medics in the field. The only reason we would need like AI medics that can deliver trauma spray foam in like a fraction of a second is if we're having crazy casualties, you know, like, and the reason we're gonna have crazy casualties is because there's gonna be drones everywhere, and the lethality of World War III, God forbid, it's just gonna be unimaginable. It's gonna make World War I of like lobbing chemical shells at each other from really far away look like child's play. The precision involved and the scale of death involved is going to be absolutely mind-boggling. People cannot even imagine it. And once again, this is why I'm making the episode, is so that we can connect all the dots here, that the concept of having racist, supremacist people making these doctrines and in charge of these technologies is something we need to push back against. We should not have AI bombs loitering in the area for endless amounts of time. I mean, we need to be smarter with our use of technology here. And as civilians, who are paying for this stuff. This is our tax dollars. We need to be the one that says no. We need health care. We need our roads to be done. We need medicine and education and safety, not more robot bombs to go to the other side of the planet. This is absolutely ridiculous. And it really brings like a moral problem to the surface on so many different levels that we need to address as a species, but also as a nation. And I'll talk about this real quick. That advantages of Aerosonde VTOL UAS for naval operations. So I wanted to give people. I'm not going to read this, but I wanted to give people an idea of what the robot vertical takeoff surveillance craft could look like. And it says that this is for the Navy, so probably something like this. But this whole thing is a market. All these defense contractors, like right now, yesterday I think there was a big defense contractor market where all these people came together and they're selling all these different robot killbots, and they have these giant symposiums like a supermarket of genocidal robot killbots. They do them in El Paso in Texas. Todd Miller's talked about this before as well. It's horrifying. You shouldn't be able to go to some symposium of death and destruction powered by AI. It's absolutely insane. But that's what's going on. This is a business opportunity for these people. Massive, massive business opportunity. And I wanted to show one last thing before we head out. Shield AI reveals VTOL autonomous fighter jet dubbed XBAT. So this is what the future of some of the VTOL robot fighters will be. I guarantee you that because of the lethality that I'm talking about here, that people, that America, that basically everybody will start turning to drones more and more and more to try to stem the losses, because it's going to be absolutely astounding. I just can't even put it into words. But the Star Wars drone or droid wars and Clone Wars may be a lot closer than what people are expecting. So I just wanted to give people some food for thought of how 1800s ideologies are being used to justify our robot bomb speedcraft today, and that it's not hopeless, that we can, like I said, there was 500 years of resistance in the 500 years that they've been trying to do this shit. So like, we can stop them. We just have to organize and put our foot down, and we are doing that. But this is our time, and I'll go into it some more in other episodes. But there's two paths for Earth. There's like industrial destruction and like spiritual life. I mean, I don't know how to put it in a different way, but like, I'll talk about it more another time. But we're really at an inflection point, or like where we have to make an ultimatum, we have to make a decision. We're at a split in the road. We have to decide where we're going to go as a species. So I hope this will give you guys some inspiration and clarity as to where we're at and where we need to go and how to protect our future from stuff like this. And for me, I don't want America to be isolationist, whether or not it's at the top of the empire or the pyramid, at the top of the pyramid scheme or the bottom of the pyramid scheme. I don't agree with the pyramid scheme in general. We should not have a Ponzi pyramid scheme as the Earth government. So we need everybody in solidarity, all nations of the Earth, all colors of people working together to try to make the Earth better. And we've never been closer to that than where we are. I know with all of this stuff that I just read, it doesn't feel like that. But that's why they're doing this, is because all of these underdog countries are all coming together now. And there's a chance for a new world. It's not even a chance. There's a new world already here that they're trying to contain with the tariffs and the robot fleet. This is an act of desperation. And I see it as that. We all need to see it as that. And it's the death throes, I would say, of the empire. We're in the last days of the empire, and good riddance to the past 500 years of hegemony and racism. We will leave that in the past, and we'll have a new future of Earth, of all of us together. And we're going to do it. We're closer than ever, like I said. So I'll be making some more stuff, and welcome back, guys. Definitely keep on sticking around and be looking forward to some more stuff, probably next week. So, adios.
Okay, let it be known. I'm working hard when I ain't on the phone. This ain't a home, this ain't a phone. Grind never stopping, I'm keeping it cold. Unlocking the door with the holy key. You supposed to be this close to me, and hopefully you understand G.O.D. Maybe this cold and I'm talking like no degrees. This ain't a fluke. I seen it way before it ever happened. He gave me the view. I had to put in my time on the TV. It coming in soon. I couldn't leave it all up to a variant or an experience. You gotta get up and do what it do. So complicated, homie, it's you. Always gonna wait until you in the mood. I've been running, came out gunning, stopped the fronting on your word. It's what you hear, not what you heard. I'ma hang on every verb. I'ma show you what it's worth. Every day I'm on the earth till they put me in the dirt. I'ma get into it first. Said I'ma get into it first. Until they put me in the dirt. Said I'ma get into it first. Said I'ma get into it. I can't break, that's the thing about me. I won't put these goals on freeze. I can't break, that's the thing about me. I won't put these goals on freeze. You cannot stop me, I mean this spinach and broccoli. Termination like I'm Rocky, lift the heavy, no spot please. Body back a beating and I get away scotch-free. And I'ma take control, unbreakable. I sense the face, the shakes is cold, the grace is more. Plus it's really the motivation, so it's thank you so. Like that's on my neck, hard work on my break. The easy road taking the left, it's on my chest. No time for regrets, faith in the Jimmy like Steph. Shooting is wet like clay, the party ain't maybe this way. I'm taking all of this left to the bank. I'ma deposit and see what it make. Shoot it, so it's reap. I paid a meter, I came in with Peter like Peter on water. I'm stepping in deeper, they know that I'm coming like follow the leader. So I'm taking a chance today. Standing inside of the kitchen, I turn on the heater. I'm here to turn on my brothers and sisters and cousins and mothers until my believers get into it first. Said I'ma get into it first. Until they put me in the dirt. Said I'ma get into it first. Said I'ma get into it. I can't break, that's the thing about me. I won't put these goals on freeze. I can't break, that's the thing